Ryan sat across from his boss, the cold, sterile office offering no comfort. The walls, once adorned with awards and accolades that he had helped the company earn, now felt like a prison. His fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the desk, an unconscious habit that betrayed the storm brewing inside him. Every tap echoed in the tense silence, a rhythmic reminder of what was coming next. "You're done, Ryan." His boss's voice sliced through the stillness, as cold and sharp as a blade. "Pack your things. I don't want to see you here again." Ryan's heart slammed against his chest. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. But, to his credit, he didn't flinch. For years, he had been the backbone of this company. His late nights, the hours spent dealing with demanding clients, the constant grind, it was all meant to pay off, and today was supposed to be the culmination of all his hard work. He had just been told that he was up for a promotion just hours earlier. A promise of a 47K bonus, a substantial sum that was supposed to reward him for his loyalty and dedication. And now, with a single sentence, his boss was taking it all away. Ryan stood, slowly, but his mind was already racing, formulating a response, a plan, anything to get his bearings. But there was nothing left to say. His boss had made up his mind, and the weight of the betrayal crushed him. As he turned and walked toward the door, every step felt heavier than the last. The quiet click of his shoes against the marble floor seemed deafening, the reality of what had just happened settling in like a thick fog. Just before exiting, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. His boss was already back at his desk, no hint of regret or remorse in his expression. There was no confrontation, no apology, just the impersonal dismissal of a man who had always seen him as nothing more than a cog in the machine. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and Ryan let out the breath he had been holding since the moment his boss had spoken. But there was no relief, only a rising tide of anger, betrayal, and a burning desire for revenge. This wasn't over, far from it. Ryan had known about the $3.2 million account for months. It was one of his boss's prized assets, an account tied to some of the company's most lucrative clients. He had seen it on his boss's desk more than once, the numbers glowing brightly on the screen, flaunting the wealth that he had helped to build. Ryan wasn't just a low-level employee, he was someone who had kept the wheels turning in this place, day after day. His boss had always been too arrogant, too careless to keep things hidden. Now, that same arrogance would cost him everything. Ryan wasn't just going to walk away, he was going to take what was rightfully his, and he was going to make sure his boss paid for everything. The 47K bonus was a small price for the type of retribution Ryan had in mind. As he exited the building, the evening air hit his face, cold and refreshing, but it did nothing to quell the fire raging inside him. There was a plan already taking shape in his mind. He knew exactly how to get to the money, how to make his boss's life crumble. Every detail had been carefully thought out in advance. There would be no second chances, no room for mistakes. Ryan was no fool. He had already started gathering information, and soon enough it would all fall into place. His boss had underestimated him. He had thought Ryan would just take the firing, pack up, and disappear into the ether. But Ryan wasn't that kind of man. He wouldn't let the years of hard work and loyalty go to waste. And he wasn't going to let his boss get away with this. No one did that to Ryan and got away with it. The stakes had just been raised. Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from an old contact in the company. Ryan smiled to himself. It was all coming together. His next move was already in motion, and there was no turning back now. With cold determination, Ryan climbed into his car, the sound of the engine starting filling the silence around him. The world outside blurred as he focused on the road ahead. His plan was simple. His boss had everything Ryan needed. The wealth, the power, the control. But it was all about to be taken from him, one calculated move at a time. Ryan wasn't just going to take the money. He was going to make his boss regret ever underestimating him. Every move from now on would be a calculated step toward reclaiming what was his and showing his boss the true cost of betrayal. The city lights blurred past as Ryan drove through the dark streets. The initial rush of anger had begun to fade, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. There was no time for impulsiveness, no room for mistakes. This wasn't just about getting even, it was about completely dismantling everything his boss had built, and that meant disappearing, isolating himself from everyone and everything that could jeopardize the plan. Ryan's phone buzzed again, another message. He pulled over and glanced at the screen. It was from an old colleague, someone he'd kept in touch with over the years. They had once worked closely together, but over time their paths had diverged. Still, the connection remained, useful when it mattered. The message was simple. "I know what happened. If you need anything, I'm here." Ryan's eyes narrowed. The offer was genuine, but that was exactly why he had to shut everything down. He couldn't afford to let anyone get too close right now, not even people he trusted. Too many loose ends. The walls were closing in, and the last thing he needed was someone to help him out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. His trust would be earned later. After the dust settled, his plan was already in motion and he needed to keep a low profile. No calls to family, no reach outs to friends, no one who could tie him back to the business. He had been loyal for years, and yet, when the time came, loyalty had meant nothing to his boss. Now, Ryan had to work with the same detachment, the same cold calculation. He deleted the message from his colleague without responding and drove on, deeper into the city's heart. He had arranged a place to stay, a small anonymous apartment in a part of town where no one would recognize him. It wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. His focus was on the goal, not comfort. Ryan spent the next few days off the grid. He used burner phones, set up new email accounts, and meticulously erased every trace of his former life. If anyone came looking for him, they wouldn't find a thing. No digital footprints, no phone records, no one to speak to. Ryan had become a ghost. The isolation wasn't as difficult as he had expected. In fact, it felt liberating. It gave him the clarity he needed to refine his plan further. His former life felt like a distant memory now. His old colleagues, the clients, the routines. It was all behind him. The only thing that mattered now was the account, the $3.2 million, the Achilles heel of his boss's empire. It was the key to everything. Ryan had spent years gaining access to sensitive information, learning the ins and outs of the company's financial structure. He knew where the weaknesses lay, and he wasn't about to waste this opportunity. The legal system, the tech world, and his connections within the company would be his tools. But first, he had to be patient. He needed time to move in silence. It wasn't just about the money, it was about ensuring his boss would never see him coming. Ryan's boss had always been a man of excess, never considering the possibility that someone close to him might want to see him fall. That was his mistake. In the darkness of his temporary apartment, Ryan set up his next move. He opened his laptop, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. He was going to find every account his boss had, every hidden asset, every side deal that could be leveraged. And when the time was right, he would strike. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. "Yeah? Ryan, it's James. I've got something for you," the voice on the other end said, barely above a whisper. James was one of the IT guys at the company, someone who had always been in the background, unseen by most, but Ryan knew his value. If anyone could help him break into the company's systems, it was James. "What do you have?" Ryan asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I've got access to some of the servers. If you need a way in, I can get you the keys to the kingdom." "But it's going to cost you." Ryan smirked. James wasn't the type to come cheap, but that didn't matter. He could afford it. After all, this was about more than just money. "I'll pay you what you're worth. Just get it done." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then James spoke again. "I'll send you what you need. Don't make me regret this, Ryan." "Don't worry," Ryan replied coldly. "You won't." As the call ended, Ryan leaned back in his chair. He could feel the weight of everything he had planned slowly coming into focus. The pieces were falling into place. His boss would never know what hit him, and that was just the beginning. Ryan sat in the small apartment, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating his face as he reviewed the files James had sent him. Access granted. The encryption was bypassed, and Ryan now had the keys to everything his former boss had worked so hard to keep hidden. But even as he stared at the digital treasure trove before him, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. For years, he had been loyal. He had worked late nights, sacrificed weekends, and put his blood, sweat, and tears into making the company a success. He had been the one to smooth over client disputes, the one who always found a way to deliver on promises, no matter the cost to himself. But all that loyalty, all that sacrifice, had meant nothing. His boss had been playing a game from the beginning, a game where loyalty had no value, and the only thing that mattered was power. Ryan had trusted him, believed in the promises he made, and in return, he had been tossed aside like an outdated piece of software. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it went deeper than that. As Ryan dug through the files, he uncovered more than just financial discrepancies. He uncovered a pattern of lies, half-truths, and broken promises stretching back years. His boss had been playing everyone for fools, stringing them along with fake reassurances while lining his own pockets with wealth stolen from the very people who trusted him. Ryan's fingers hovered over the keys as he read through a series of emails, some dating back years, detailing questionable financial deals, illegal transfers, and contracts that had been forged to cover up the truth. The more he read, the clearer it became. The man he had worked for wasn't just a businessman, he was a con artist, and Ryan had been an unwilling accomplice to his crimes. "God, I was a fool," Ryan muttered under his breath, his anger growing with each passing minute. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just his boss who had betrayed him. There were others too, people Ryan had called friends, colleagues he had trusted. They had all known what was going on, but had chosen to turn a blind eye for their own gain. No one had ever questioned the money flowing into the company, the lavish perks that seemed to appear from thin air. They had all been complicit in the lies. Ryan's mind raced as he pieced together the larger picture. His boss wasn't just a selfish tyrant, he was a master manipulator, using people like chess pieces to further his own agenda, and now Ryan was learning that even those who had worked alongside him had their hands dirty. Some had been in on the schemes, benefiting from the profits, while others, like Ryan, had simply been used and discarded. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment as the weight of the past few days sank in. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it wasn't even just about getting revenge on his boss. Ryan was beginning to see the full extent of the web of lies that had trapped him and everyone else in a never-ending cycle of deceit. But the truth was clear now. Ryan had been played, and it was time to turn the tables. If his boss thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was dead wrong. Ryan had every intention of bringing everything crashing down, piece by piece, person by person. With renewed purpose, Ryan began drafting a plan, one that went beyond just taking the $3.2 million account. He had to expose everything. The lies, the manipulation, the deceit. He would make sure that his boss and everyone who had turned a blind eye to the truth would pay the price for their actions. But to do that, he needed leverage. And leverage was exactly what he was going to find in the next phase of his investigation. As he continued to scroll through the files, a name popped up, one he hadn't expected. It was his old friend Mark, the one person Ryan had trusted more than anyone else. Mark had been with the company since the beginning. He had helped Ryan land his first major client. They had shared late-night drinks, talked about the future, and dreamed of what they could achieve together. But now, Ryan saw Mark's name attached to the very contracts that had led to their downfall. He was complicit in the cover-up. Ryan's stomach turned as he read the emails Mark had sent to their boss, offering advice on how to bury the evidence of illegal transactions and advising on ways to cover up the fraud. Ryan had always known that Mark had ambitions of his own, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The betrayal ran deeper than just his boss. It extended to everyone Ryan had trusted in the past. He stared at the screen, his jaw clenched, the sense of betrayal sinking even further. He wasn't just going after his boss now. Ryan had a target on everyone who had played him for a fool, and Mark was at the top of that list. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice. And it was time to make sure that everyone who had wronged him felt the weight of their actions. Ryan sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, his fingers tapping on the desk in an absent rhythm. The digital files spread before him were no longer just numbers and spreadsheets, they were the blueprint for his revenge. He had already seen enough to know his boss had crossed the line 100 times over. But now, it was time to dig deeper. Time to bring every crime to light. Time to find the smoking gun that would destroy everything his boss had worked so hard to keep hidden. Ryan knew this wasn't going to be easy. The accounts were complicated, layered in ways that made them hard to follow. But Ryan wasn't a stranger to numbers. In fact, he had always prided himself on his ability to see patterns in the chaos. Over the years, he had learned how to read financial statements, how to spot discrepancies, and how to navigate the complex world of high finance. His boss had trusted him for those very skills. Now, those skills were going to bring his boss down. He started with the transaction logs, the ones marked as confidential, the ones that had been buried deep in the company's financial records. These were the accounts that, when examined closely, told the full story. His boss had been siphoning funds from various clients, skimming off the top and funneling money into offshore accounts. The fraud was vast and it was intricate, but it wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. Ryan's eyes scanned over the numbers, analyzing them with a practiced eye. It was clear now, his boss had been laundering money. He had forged contracts, created fake invoices, and manipulated financial reports to make the numbers appear legitimate. But to someone who knew what to look for, it was all too easy to spot the discrepancies. The emails Ryan had uncovered confirmed it. His boss had worked with an underground network of financial advisors, tech experts, and lawyers to cover up the transactions. Each email was a breadcrumb, leading him to the next piece of the puzzle. Ryan knew that with the right evidence, he could bring his boss to his knees. But there was more. As Ryan dug deeper, he found a troubling pattern in the transactions. His boss had been secretly funneling money to a shell company in the Caribbean, a company that had no legitimate reason to exist and whose directors were listed as unknown. Ryan made a mental note to investigate this further. The fact that this company had been operating under the radar for so long suggested that his boss had been hiding more than just money. This was far bigger than a simple financial scandal. There was something deeper here, something that Ryan was going to uncover. Ryan's mind raced as he pieced the data together. The fraud, the shell companies, the manipulated accounts, all of it was leading to one conclusion. His boss had been running a massive operation and Ryan had the tools to take it down. But he needed more. He needed hard proof. He needed to find a direct connection between his boss and the illegal network he had built, something that would link everything together in a way that even the best lawyers couldn't dispute. He reached for his phone and called James, the IT contact who had given him access to the company's servers. The lines between friends and enemies were beginning to blur, but Ryan had no choice. He needed James's help, and he had to trust him, at least for now. James, I need you to pull up the communication logs for the Caribbean Shell Company. I need everything, emails, wire transfers, contracts, anything that connects my boss to them. James hesitated for a moment before responding. You sure you want to go that route? You're not the only one with things to lose if this gets out. Ryan's jaw tightened. I've already lost everything. Now it's his turn. A long silence passed before James spoke again. I'll get it done, but this is the last time I help you. Don't make me regret it. Ryan ended the call, feeling the weight of his decision settle on him. James wasn't a man to be trusted lightly, but in this game, trust was a luxury Ryan couldn't afford. The only thing that mattered now was getting the evidence that would bring his boss to the ground. As the hours passed, Ryan continued to comb through the files, his mind laser-focused on one thing, bringing down his boss's empire. The fraud was massive, but so was the reward. With the right evidence, Ryan could expose his boss's entire operation, but he needed to act quickly. The longer he waited, the greater the chance that his boss would catch wind of his investigation. Finally, just as Ryan was about to close his laptop, a new email notification popped up on the screen. It was from James. Ryan's pulse quickened as he clicked it open. Found it, the email said, followed by a secure link. Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he clicked on the link, and the documents that appeared on the screen confirmed everything. Direct evidence that his boss had been laundering money through the Caribbean Shell Company, wire transfers, signed contracts, and even emails where his boss had instructed his financial team to cover their tracks. It was all there. Ryan stared at the screen, his lips curling into a cold smile. This was it. This was the leverage he needed. His boss would never see this coming, and when Ryan was done, not only would he have the $3.2 million, but he would have destroyed his boss's entire empire in the process. Ryan sat in the dim light of his apartment, the air heavy with the tension of the hours he'd spent combing through every digital trace his boss had left behind. The documents James had sent over were damning, but there was still work to do. He needed to make sure the evidence was airtight, no loopholes, no ways for his boss to worm his way out of this. The financial transactions were damning, but they needed more context to stand up in court. Ryan knew this game well enough. He had spent years in the corporate world, studying the way people hid their dirty secrets behind layers of bureaucracy and legal jargon. But that's what made this moment so satisfying. His boss had never expected anyone to look this deep, especially not someone who had worked so closely with him. Ryan had seen how his boss operated. Arrogant, brash, always assuming his wealth and influence would protect him. Now, that very arrogance would be his downfall. Ryan's fingers hovered over the keys of his laptop as he opened the next file. The digital trail of corruption was endless, and each new document only made his desire for revenge burn hotter. But he wasn't going to stop there. The money he had already uncovered was impressive, but it was the digital infrastructure behind it that was going to finish his boss off. His next target was the company's internal systems, the ones that connected every part of the operation. If he could gain access to these systems, he could shut everything down: payroll, investments, client communications, and most importantly, the passwords that gave his boss direct control over the company's millions. If Ryan could get those passwords, there would be no way for his boss to stop him. He had already been given access to the company's basic files, thanks to James. But Ryan needed more. He needed the root access that would allow him to navigate the entire system without raising red flags. That meant gaining entry to the company's password vault, a digital fortress where the most sensitive information was stored. Ryan knew exactly how to do it. He had worked on security systems like this before. He understood the cracks, the small openings that even the most sophisticated defenses couldn't close. His boss had always been too trusting, too convinced that his position at the top of the corporate ladder made him untouchable. But Ryan had seen the flaws, the subtle errors that most people wouldn't notice. He had been in meetings with the IT department, had spoken with the security team, had seen how they operated. It wasn't enough to just be smart. You had to understand how systems were built, how they were maintained, and, most importantly, how they could be broken. Ryan opened a new program on his laptop and began to work. Line by line, code by code, he typed out the commands that would allow him to bypass the company's security protocols. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy, but Ryan had the patience of someone who had waited years for this moment. He had already been in the system once. Now, he was going in again, this time with the full knowledge of what was at stake. His fingers flew across the keys, typing out complex strings of code that would allow him to navigate through the firewall and access the company's most confidential data. He had learned how to break into systems during his time in the tech department. It wasn't something he had done often, but when he did, he made sure to cover his tracks. This time, he wouldn't be covering anything up. He would be exposing everything. Ryan paused for a moment, staring at the screen. The last firewall was the hardest to breach. It was designed to protect the company's passwords, the master keys to the kingdom. He had always known it was there, but he had never been sure how it worked. Now, he was about to find out. His hands were steady, his mind sharp. This was his moment. All the time he had spent in the trenches, all the frustrations he had faced, this was what it was all leading to. He punched in the final line of code. The screen flickered. Then, the door opened. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he thought he had triggered an alarm, but as the door swung open, he quickly realized it wasn't a security breach, it was access. The system had granted him the permissions he needed. He was in. The password vault appeared on his screen, and Ryan's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. With the right passwords, he could drain the accounts, erase any evidence that would lead back to him, and leave his boss with nothing but the shattered remnants of his empire. Ryan clicked through the vault and found what he had been looking for. The passwords, account numbers, security questions, and access keys. Everything he needed to claim his prize was right there. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, and then, with cold precision, he began the process of transferring the funds. This was it. His revenge was finally within reach. His boss wouldn't know what hit him. The cool glow of the screen reflected off Ryan's face as he finished locking down his access to the accounts. The transfer had gone smoothly, too smoothly. He still had a few more steps to complete, but the rush of hitting the final keystroke brought a rare sense of satisfaction. The financial side of his plan was secure, but Ryan knew that without getting his boss physically cornered, this entire operation wouldn't hold. He needed to find out where his boss had gone, where he was hiding, and more importantly, how he could make his life crumble in a way that would be felt on every front. Ryan leaned back in his chair, staring at the map that had become his new obsession. He had always known about his boss's penchant for luxury and seclusion, but Ryan had never really connected the dots. His boss had always mentioned a second home, a place to unwind away from the stress of the corporate world. It wasn't much, just an offhand comment during one of the countless meetings, but that one comment had planted a seed in Ryan's mind, and now he needed to figure out where exactly that second home was. Florida. The sun-drenched escape his boss had chosen for his retreat. It had always been a mystery, a vague reference that Ryan had never paid much attention to, but now it was the key to the final phase of his plan. Ryan fired up his laptop again, pulling up a new search engine window and starting to dig. He began cross-referencing details from his boss's digital footprint. Business transactions, credit card receipts, phone calls made during business trips. It didn't take long before a pattern emerged. There were frequent high-value transfers to a luxury property management firm in Florida. His boss was using the firm to manage a portfolio of properties, one of which was clearly a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood near Palm Beach. Ryan smiled coldly. The pieces were finally falling into place. This was exactly the break he needed. He had to know where his boss had been hiding, and now he had an address. Not just any address, but one that screamed wealth and privilege, one that would be impossible to ignore when everything started to unfold. Ryan wasn't about to waste time. He made a few calls, piecing together information from a range of different contacts. With each call, his web of intel tightened. He needed to move quickly. The more time his boss had to react, the harder it would be to trap him. By late afternoon, Ryan had his plan. He would fly down to Florida and confront his boss directly, on his turf. It was no longer just about the money or the betrayal. It was about taking everything from the man who had wronged him. He wasn't going to settle for taking his boss's finances. He was going to take his life, piece by piece. Ryan booked his flight and gathered the essentials for the trip. His boss had built a life around luxury, but Ryan knew that luxury had its own vulnerabilities. The more comfortable people got, the more complacent they became. His boss would think nothing of Ryan's visit. He would think that Ryan was a thing of the past, forgotten and irrelevant. But that's exactly what made the plan so brilliant. By the time Ryan arrived in Florida, the address he had secured was marked on his phone's map. The house was located in an exclusive gated community, one of the richest areas in the state. Mansions lined the streets, each more extravagant than the last, but there was one mansion that stood out to Ryan, the one he had come to claim. As he approached the property, Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. The mansion loomed before him, a fortress of wealth that had been built on deceit and exploitation. His boss's life was contained in these walls. Every inch of the property symbolized everything Ryan despised about the man. He parked his car at the edge of the neighborhood and walked the rest of the way, avoiding any attention. No one in the community knew who Ryan was, and that was just how he wanted it. He moved with the quiet determination of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. He was no longer just an employee. He was a force of nature, ready to unleash his wrath on the man who had taken everything from him. As he neared the gate, Ryan stopped and took a deep breath. The house in front of him was more than just a property. It was the center of the empire his boss had built. It was where his wealth had been nurtured, where the lies had been created, and where Ryan had been betrayed. Ryan needed to act fast. He wasn't here for a confrontation, at least not yet. His first priority was to get inside, find the evidence that would completely destroy his boss's reputation, and give him the leverage he needed to finish what he had started. He pulled out his phone and quickly sent a message to James. "I need you to run a security scan on the house. I need the cameras, the alarms, everything." James replied almost immediately. "It's already done. The system's vulnerable, Ryan. Get in and out quickly." Ryan nodded to himself, determination setting in. Everything had led to this moment. The trap was set. All he needed to do now was wait for the right moment to strike. The game was no longer just about money, it was about control. And Ryan was ready to take back everything his boss had stolen, one calculated move at a time. Ryan stood at the gates of the mansion, his heart racing with anticipation. His boss's extravagant hideaway loomed before him, the marble facade gleaming in the Florida sun. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about reclaiming everything that had been stolen from him, and he was one step closer to completing his plan. But as he made his way through the security gates, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're not supposed to be here," a man called out, stepping into his path. Ryan paused, eyes narrowing as he took in the stranger standing before him. The man was in his mid-30s, dressed in a casual polo shirt and khakis, his posture defensive. The last thing Ryan had expected was to be confronted by someone other than his boss. "Who are you?" Ryan asked coolly, keeping his voice steady. "I should be asking you that," the man replied, eyeing Ryan with suspicion. "You're trespassing. You need to leave." Ryan's mind raced. This wasn't just a random security guard. It was clear from the way the man spoke that he had some kind of connection to the house and by extension, his boss. But who was he? Ryan studied him more closely. There was something familiar about the man's face, something that gnawed at the back of his mind. Then it clicked. The ex-boyfriend. Ryan had heard rumors about his boss's personal life, whispers of a former lover who had been in the picture long before Ryan ever came along. His boss had never spoken about it directly, but the few times he had mentioned his past, it had always been with a note of irritation. It seemed that this was the same man. "You've been with her," Ryan said, his voice calm but piercing. The man's face faltered for a second, a mix of anger and recognition crossing his features. He wasn't prepared for Ryan's accusation. "You don't know what you're talking about," the ex-boyfriend snapped, trying to step closer to Ryan. "Get lost." Ryan held his ground. "No, I think I know exactly what I'm talking about." He'd expected the confrontation to come later, when he would finally face his boss. But now, with this man standing in front of him, it seemed like the universe was pushing him towards something bigger than just money or revenge. This man held the key to more than just his boss's personal life. If Ryan played his cards right, he could use this to his advantage. "I've got information that could change everything," Ryan said, his voice low but firm. "Your boss is going down. You've got two choices. Stay here and keep hiding in his shadow, or make a deal with me and come out from under his thumb." The ex-boyfriend hesitated, his eyes darting to the mansion behind him. "I'm not in the mood for games. Get out of here." Ryan saw the tension in the man's shoulders. He was conflicted. Ryan could see that there was something more to the relationship, something that had kept the ex-boyfriend tied to this house and its owner, but it wasn't enough to keep him here any longer. Ryan took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't need you to believe me, but I'll give you this. I know what your boss has been hiding. I know about the money laundering, the shell companies, and the illegal transfers. You've been wrapped up in it too, haven't you?" The ex-boyfriend froze, his eyes locking with Ryan's. The truth was now hanging in the air between them, undeniable. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice cracked. Ryan smirked, knowing he had him right where he wanted him. "We both know that's a lie. I'm not here to ruin your life, but I'll expose everything if I have to. You can either help me, or I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you've been involved in." The man took a step back, his eyes flickering with a mix of fear and defiance. He was considering his options, weighing the potential consequences of turning against Ryan's boss. He knew what Ryan was capable of, but more importantly, he knew how far the trail of deceit stretched. "I can't just leave," he said after a long pause, his voice barely above a whisper. There's too much at stake. You don't understand what he'll do to me. Ryan's patience wore thin. No, I understand perfectly. That's why you're going to help me. You've been living in his shadow long enough and you're too scared to make a move. But if you help me, I'll make sure you come out clean. Otherwise, you're going down with him. The ex-boyfriend stood there for a moment, silent, the weight of Ryan's words sinking in. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. Fine, I'll help you, but you need to promise me that this ends the way I want it. Ryan held his gaze. You'll get what you want, just remember, the clock is ticking. We don't have much time. Ryan now had an ally, one that would help him crack open the last layers of his boss's empire. The ex-boyfriend knew the mansion, the private security, and the hidden secrets that Ryan needed to uncover. And most importantly, he knew how to navigate the murky waters of his boss's personal life. Ryan's plan was falling into place faster than he had expected, but now, with his new ally by his side, it was time to take the next step, bring his boss into the open, and make him face the consequences of his actions. The endgame was near. The mansion in Florida was more than just a home, it was a fortress. Ryan had been inside the gates, met the ex-boyfriend, and heard the whispers that confirmed everything he had suspected about his boss's empire. But there was still work to be done. The most critical phase of his plan was now underway, and Ryan wasn't about to let any distractions throw him off course. Inside the mansion, the lavish furnishings and excessive displays of wealth no longer impressed him. It was all a facade, a mask for the dirty dealings hidden beneath the surface. His boss's world was built on lies, but the house was just a backdrop. Ryan had already taken the most crucial step. He had access to the financial accounts, the passwords, the data. But now, he needed to make the most significant impact. The ex-boyfriend had been surprisingly cooperative, pointing Ryan to a hidden room where his boss kept the files and details on his most significant transactions. The room, secluded from the main house, was where his boss stored everything he needed to keep his empire running. But it wasn't the physical documents that Ryan was after. He had already secured the digital evidence, and now it was time to shut everything down. Ryan sat at the sleek, dark oak desk in the hidden room, the soft hum of the mansion's security system in the background. With his laptop in hand, he connected to the company's central system. He had already installed a remote access tool, giving him control of the entire company's digital infrastructure. The system was robust, designed to resist breaches, but Ryan knew the weaknesses. His earlier infiltration of his boss's financial accounts had provided the keys to the kingdom. With the press of a button, Ryan initiated the command sequence. The screen blinked briefly before the words "Command accepted" appeared. It was simple, too simple. The moment was exhilarating, but there was no time for satisfaction. The countdown had begun, and everything was about to change. Ryan leaned back in the chair, his eyes fixed on the screen as he watched the system processes begin to halt. His boss's precious accounts, the ones he had guarded so fiercely, were being locked down. Accounts that held millions in assets, investments, and offshore funds were freezing in real time. Ryan had set it up in such a way that, once frozen, his boss would have no way to access the money, no way to transfer or move it. The feeling was almost surreal. This was the culmination of everything, the years of hard work, the betrayal, the painstaking preparation. And now, his boss was about to lose everything. The $3.2 million account that had been so securely hidden was now nothing more than a shadow of what it once was. A sudden noise behind him made Ryan pause. His heart skipped a beat as he turned quickly, expecting an interruption, but it was only the ex-boyfriend standing in the doorway, watching him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "You're really doing it, huh?" the man said, stepping further into the room. "You're taking him down." Ryan nodded, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as the final steps of the freezing process executed. The time had come to bring his boss to his knees, and Ryan was relishing every second of it. "This is just the beginning," Ryan said, his voice low. "Once the accounts are frozen, the real fun starts. We'll make him feel every ounce of pain he's caused. Not just financially, emotionally, socially, legally. He's gonna wish he never crossed me." The ex-boyfriend raised an eyebrow. "And what happens when he realizes it's all you? You don't think he'll come after you?" Ryan's eyes narrowed as he looked back at the screen. The process was nearly complete. "It doesn't matter. He won't be able to do anything once everything comes to light. We've already got him cornered. The money is just the bait." The words hung in the air as the final transactions processed. Ryan's fingers struck the final key and the system confirmed that everything was locked. The transfer capabilities were disabled, the account balances frozen in place. Ryan sat back, breathing a little easier. The first phase was done. The accounts were effectively paralyzed, and his boss had no idea what was coming next. Now, it was a matter of timing. Ryan knew that the next step in his plan was crucial. He had to expose his boss's corruption, make sure the world saw the truth, but before he could do that, he had to ensure his boss had no chance of covering his tracks. Ryan turned to the ex-boyfriend, who was still standing near the door, unsure of how to react. "Do you have any idea where he is now?" Ryan asked. "Any clue where he might be hiding?" The ex-boyfriend paused for a moment as if considering whether or not to answer. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he spoke. "He's gone into hiding. I don't know exactly where, but I've seen him leave for Florida multiple times over the years. There's an old cabin up near the Everglades. He's always been paranoid about people finding out his business. If I were him, that's where I'd go." Ryan's mind immediately began to formulate the next move. The cabin in the Everglades was a perfect place for his boss to retreat to when things started falling apart. It was isolated, far from any prying eyes, but it wouldn't be far enough. "I'm going to find him," Ryan said firmly. "And when I do, it's game over." As Ryan made his final preparations, he couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. The plan was coming together, and his boss's world was about to implode. The accounts were frozen, the lies were exposed, and now Ryan was about to finish what he had started. The clock was ticking, and Ryan could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The financial devastation he had inflicted on his boss was just the beginning. Freezing the accounts had been an exhilarating move, but Ryan knew the real battle was about to begin. His boss wouldn't give up easily. He'd have lawyers, connections, and a web of people willing to fight back. But Ryan was prepared for that. He had calculated every move, every possible response. Ryan didn't need to hide anymore. The quiet before the storm had ended, and now it was time to bring the fight to his boss. The accounts were frozen, the money locked, and the truth was ready to be exposed. But Ryan needed to be strategic. He wasn't going to let his boss drag him through a long, drawn-out legal battle. Instead, he would force his hand and make sure his boss had no choice but to face the consequences. The first step in Ryan's legal strategy was simple: hit his boss where it hurt the most, his reputation. The media would be Ryan's ally in this. He reached out to a few trusted contacts in the press, offering them an exclusive story about his boss's illegal activities. Ryan had the documents, the evidence, and the cold, hard facts to expose the corruption. The press would eat it up, and his boss's carefully constructed empire would begin to crumble under the weight of the truth. Ryan had also initiated legal proceedings. He filed a lawsuit against his boss for wrongful termination, demanding a hefty settlement. But that wasn't all. Ryan had been meticulous in his research, uncovering multiple instances of fraud, breach of trust, and even potential criminal activity. He had already contacted a top-tier law firm to represent him, and they were eager to take on the case. They had the resources and the expertise to fight a legal battle of this magnitude, and they were ready to go to war. The legal documents were drawn up, and the lawsuit was filed. Ryan's lawyers wasted no time, sending a clear message to his boss's legal team. The fight was on. Ryan wasn't just seeking financial compensation, he was seeking justice, and he was prepared to drag his boss through the mud to get it. The media blitz hit the next day. Reports surfaced about the massive financial fraud, the shell companies, and the illegal transactions. Headlines screamed about the corporate empire built on lies, and Ryan's former boss was painted as the villain he truly was. His name was dragged through the press, his reputation in shambles. For the first time, Ryan could see the cracks in the fortress his boss had spent years building. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now on the defensive, trying desperately to contain the damage. Ryan watched the news unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and cold determination. His boss's downfall had begun, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Over the next few days, the legal battle intensified. Ryan's lawyers filed motions, demanded depositions, and scheduled hearings. His boss's legal team was scrambling to respond, but it was clear they were outmatched. The evidence Ryan had collected was overwhelming, and there was no easy way out. The accounts were frozen, the money was gone, and his boss's dirty secrets were now public knowledge. But Ryan wasn't satisfied with just winning in court. He had more to do. This wasn't just about a lawsuit, it was about destroying his boss's entire world. Ryan knew that once the truth came out, his boss's business would be finished. His clients would flee, his partners would sever ties, and his reputation would be shattered. But Ryan also knew that his boss had a network of people who would go to any lengths to protect him, people who were willing to fight back. Ryan had already thought of this. He wasn't going to let his boss's connections retaliate, and he wasn't going to let anyone else get hurt in the process. He made sure that every move he made was airtight, and he made sure his lawyers had all the ammunition they needed to back him up. The war was just beginning, and Ryan was prepared to fight to the end. As the days wore on, the pressure on his boss grew. The legal challenges mounted, and the media kept the heat on. Ryan's name became synonymous with justice, and his boss was painted as a criminal. The courtroom drama intensified as depositions were taken, witness statements were gathered, and the truth about the fraudulent dealings came to light. But Ryan knew the final blow was yet to come. One afternoon, while preparing for the next legal step, Ryan received a call from his lawyer. The news was significant. The authorities were now involved. A criminal investigation had been launched into his boss's activities, and it wasn't just a matter of financial fraud anymore. There were now potential charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and even conspiracy. Ryan felt a sense of finality as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. His boss was finished. The empire he had spent years building was collapsing, and there was no escape. Ryan had won, but there was still one thing left to do. Ryan needed to make sure that his boss could never come back from this. He had the legal victory, the financial payoff, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. Now, it was time to claim his prize. Ryan smiled as he hung up the phone. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. His boss's downfall was imminent, and Ryan would make sure that no one ever forgot who had brought him down. Ryan had anticipated the legal battle, the media frenzy, and the public fallout. But even he couldn't have predicted the turn of events that came next. As the lawsuit progressed and his boss's world continued to unravel, Ryan had one final ace up his sleeve, one piece of evidence that would tie everything together and ensure that his boss had nowhere to hide. It wasn't just the financial fraud or the stolen funds that would bring his boss down. No, it was something far more damning. Ryan had discovered something during his deep dive into the company's accounts, something that would forever destroy his boss's claim to innocence. A forged signature, one that was used to authorize an illegal transaction, a massive transfer of funds that linked his boss directly to a criminal enterprise. Ryan had suspected that there was something more to his boss's dealings. The money laundering, the shell companies, they all seemed too calculated, too deliberate. But it was this one transaction, buried deep within the company's records, that would be the smoking gun. It was a transfer of several $1,000,000 to an offshore account in the name of a company that didn't exist. The signature on the authorization form, however, was the one that caught Ryan's eye. It wasn't his boss's signature. It was a forged copy, one that had been meticulously crafted to look like his boss's handwriting. But it wasn't him, and Ryan knew it. He had the proof. The forged signature, the transaction records, and the emails between his boss and the individuals involved in the shady dealings. The web of lies and deception that his boss had so carefully constructed was now exposed, and Ryan had the final piece to complete the puzzle. But it wasn't just about the legal victory. This was about exposing the full extent of his boss's corruption to the world. This was about ensuring that his boss couldn't slip away through legal loopholes or technicalities. Ryan wasn't going to let that happen. The forgery was the nail in the coffin, the one thing that would guarantee his boss would be held accountable for everything he had done. Ryan contacted his lawyer, a top-tier criminal defense team that had been working with him on the civil case. The moment they saw the forged signature, they knew this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They immediately filed an updated report with the authorities, adding the new evidence to the ongoing investigation. The authorities, already well aware of the mounting evidence against his boss, jumped into action. They requested copies of all the documents Ryan had uncovered, and soon the investigation expanded. What had started as a corporate fraud case was now a full-blown criminal investigation into money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud. The forged signature was the key that unlocked the entire criminal network his boss had built over the years. Ryan could feel the momentum shifting. His boss had always thought he was untouchable, that his wealth and influence would shield him from the consequences of his actions. But Ryan had shattered that illusion. The forged signature would seal his boss's fate, and there was no way for him to escape the truth now. As the authorities moved in, the media picked up on the new developments. The story of the forged signature, coupled with the vast amount of criminal activity Ryan had exposed, sent shockwaves through the business world. Headlines screamed about the corporate kingpin who had been caught in a massive web of fraud and forgery. Ryan's former boss was now a wanted man, his once pristine reputation forever tarnished by the crimes he had committed. But Ryan wasn't done yet. He had one more thing to do. He had taken everything his boss had worked for, his money, his business, his reputation. Now, it was time to finish it. Ryan was going to make sure that his boss was held accountable not just in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion. Ryan arranged an exclusive interview with a major news outlet. He had already provided them with all the evidence, documents, emails, and the forged signature. They would broadcast the full story, exposing his boss for the fraud and criminal he truly was. The world would see the man for what he was, a liar, a thief, and a con artist. The day of the interview, Ryan sat in front of the camera, his demeanor calm, his mind focused. He spoke with a cool, detached precision, outlining the entire story, how he had been betrayed, how he had uncovered the illegal activities, and how his boss had used his wealth and influence to hide the truth. He didn't need to embellish anything. The evidence spoke for itself. As the interview aired, the backlash was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with anger and disbelief. Investors pulled their money from his boss's companies, clients severed contracts, and former colleagues distanced themselves from the once revered CEO. It was the final crushing blow to the empire his boss had built. Ryan didn't watch the aftermath. He had already moved on. His revenge was complete. His boss had lost everything: his wealth, his freedom, and his reputation. Ryan had taken it all back, and now he was free to walk away. But as he sat in the quiet of his apartment, looking out over the city, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led him to this point. The betrayal, the planning, the execution, it had all come together in the end. And though it was over, Ryan knew one thing for sure: he would never let anyone take advantage of him again. He had fought for what was rightfully his, and he had come out on top. Now, it was time to move forward and build a new life, one where he controlled the narrative and no one could ever take him down again. Ryan had expected his boss to fight back, to play every card in the book to save his empire. What he hadn't anticipated, however, was the final desperate act his boss would take in a last-ditch attempt to escape the consequences of his crimes. After the criminal investigation began and the media coverage escalated, Ryan thought his boss would retreat into the shadows. But instead, his boss staged a shocking attempt to flee, one that would make headlines once again: a fake death. It wasn't a new trick. High-profile criminals had used it before, disappearing under the guise of death and slipping away to a life of quiet luxury. But Ryan wasn't fooled. His boss, desperate to avoid jail time and public disgrace, had orchestrated a fake plane crash, a staged funeral, and a completely fabricated series of events to convince the world that he was dead. Ryan couldn't believe it when the news first broke. His boss, now reported as dead in a mysterious crash over the Atlantic, was being mourned by the media, his business partners, and even some of his employees. The funeral was held with great fanfare, a public memorial to the man who had once been revered as a corporate titan. It seemed, for all intents and purposes, that the man who had betrayed Ryan and countless others was gone forever. But Ryan was no fool. He had already begun to piece together the truth. He had seen the signs, the inconsistent reports, the hurried press releases, the lack of clear evidence regarding the crash. His boss was alive, and he had staged the entire charade to slip away undetected. Ryan was determined to expose the ruse. Ryan didn't waste any time. He reached out to his trusted contacts, pulling in private investigators and even cybersecurity experts who could dig deeper into the so-called plane crash. What they uncovered was damning. There was no wreckage, no bodies, no conclusive evidence that the crash had even happened. The so-called death was a carefully constructed lie, one designed to throw off the authorities, distract the public, and allow his boss to disappear. Ryan wasn't going to let that happen. He had already seen the extent of his boss's manipulation. But this was the final betrayal. Ryan's boss had made a mockery of the legal system, the media, and the people he had hurt over the years. But Ryan was determined to make sure the world saw through the mask. With the help of his private investigator, Ryan tracked down leads that pointed to a remote villa in the Caribbean, another safe house, another place his boss had stashed himself to evade justice. Ryan knew he had to act quickly. If his boss managed to lay low long enough, he might just slip away without ever being held accountable. He didn't hesitate. Ryan coordinated with international law enforcement, tipping them off to his boss's location. It wasn't long before authorities raided the villa and arrested his boss. The illusion of death had crumbled, and his boss was exposed for the fraud he truly was. He was no longer a grieving family member. He was a wanted criminal on the run. The moment the arrest was made public, the media stormed once again. News outlets were quick to report on the stunning twist, how the corporate magnate had staged his own death to avoid criminal prosecution. The lies his boss had told for years were now out in the open for everyone to see. The world was watching as the man who had once been untouchable was hauled away in handcuffs. Ryan watched from his apartment, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. His boss's empire was in ruins, and the final desperate attempt to escape had only sealed his fate. Ryan had not only stripped him of his wealth, but had now ensured that he would face the full extent of the law. There was no more running, no more hiding. His boss had played his last card, and it had backfired. Ryan felt a strange sense of closure. The battle had been long, and the price had been high, but in the end, justice had been served. His boss had been exposed for the fraud and criminal he was, and Ryan had taken back everything that was rightfully his. The media coverage continued for days, the arrest making headlines around the world. The story of the fake death, the stage crash, and the eventual capture of his boss became one of the most talked about scandals in recent corporate history. It was the end of an era for his boss, one built on lies, manipulation, and deceit. As the news reports continued to unfold, Ryan felt a rare sense of peace. The fight was over, his revenge was complete. He had claimed back his dignity, his money, and most importantly, his future. Ryan had expected his boss to try every trick in the book to evade the consequences of his crimes, but he hadn't anticipated the ex-boyfriend's final move. After Ryan had successfully exposed the fake death and orchestrated his boss's arrest, the last loose end, his former ally, the ex-boyfriend, was still lingering in the background. What Ryan hadn't seen coming was the deep betrayal that would come from the very person who had been pivotal in revealing his boss's criminal activities. The ex-boyfriend, who had once been so eager to join forces with Ryan in taking down the man they both loathed, had his own motives that Ryan would soon learn about the hard way. It started innocently enough. The ex-boyfriend had seemed like a genuine ally. He had helped Ryan by providing vital information about his boss's operations and had even guided him through the mansion's security, giving him the upper hand in freezing the accounts and exposing the fraud. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. It wasn't just about revenge or justice for the ex-boyfriend, it was about his own self-preservation. Ryan's phone buzzed late one night. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but you've only seen part of the picture. Meet me. I'll show you what you've missed." Ryan's heart raced. At first he thought it was just a taunt, an attempt to manipulate him once again, but something about the message struck him as urgent. He knew who the message was from. It could only be the ex-boyfriend. After all, he was the only one who still had an axe to grind. Ryan's instincts told him to be cautious, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this meeting would change everything. With everything on the line, he couldn't afford to ignore this warning. It could be his chance to get to the bottom of things once and for all. The location was set, a secluded bar on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. It was the kind of place where deals were made in shadows and where the truth was often buried beneath layers of alcohol and smoke. Ryan didn't hesitate. He knew this could be the moment that would either solidify his victory or bring about another twist in the story that had taken over his life. He arrived at the bar, his senses on high alert. The ex-boyfriend was sitting at a dimly lit table in the back, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He looked different from the man Ryan had known. The desperation in his eyes was unmistakable. "You wanted to see me," Ryan said, keeping his voice steady. He had no time for games anymore. The ex-boyfriend gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit. We need to talk about your next move." Ryan remained standing. "You've already shown me everything I need to know. Your boss is done. You've played your part." The ex-boyfriend leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's not that simple, Ryan. You've been used." Ryan's stomach churned. He knew exactly where this was headed. "Used by who?" he asked, his voice cold. "By me," the ex-boyfriend said with a twisted smile. "I've been working with your boss all along." Ryan froze. The room felt like it was closing in on him. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his pulse quickening. "I never cared about justice, Ryan. All I wanted was power. When I found out what your boss was hiding, I saw an opportunity. I knew you would want revenge, and I knew you would go after him. I was playing both sides, feeding you just enough information to get you to tear his world apart." Ryan's mind raced as the truth began to sink in. He had been set up. The ex-boyfriend had never been on his side. He had been using Ryan to weaken his boss, to set him up for the final blow, and then to swoop in and take what was left. "But why?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why betray me after all of this?" The ex-boyfriend's smile widened. "Because now that your boss is gone, I'm the one who gets to pick up the pieces. I've been in contact with your boss's contacts, the ones who are still loyal to him. I've already arranged a deal. I'm going to walk away from all of this with something much more valuable than revenge. Control. You, Ryan, are just a stepping stone in my plan. And now that you've done all the dirty work, I'm going to take it from here." Ryan's blood ran cold as the realization hit him. The ex-boyfriend had been manipulating him all along, setting him up as a pawn in a larger game. The worst part? Ryan had been so focused on taking down his boss that he hadn't seen it coming. Now, with his boss gone, the ex-boyfriend had played his hand and was poised to take over the empire he had once shared with his boss. Ryan's fists clenched. He had been played, but it wasn't over. He wasn't going to let this man get away with it. Not after everything he had sacrificed. "You think you've won?" Ryan said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're wrong." The ex-boyfriend chuckled. "You're too late. I've already won." Ryan's mind was spinning, but his resolve was stronger than ever. This was the final betrayal, the last twist in a series of carefully laid plans. The ex-boyfriend thought he was in control, but Ryan was far from finished. He had come too far, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to let this man take everything he had worked for. Ryan stood up, his eyes fixed on the ex-boyfriend. "You may have played me, but I'll make sure you regret it. You're not walking away from this. Not now, not ever." With that, Ryan turned and walked out of the bar, his mind already working on the next move. The game wasn't over. The final act was about to begin. The courtroom was filled with an air of tense anticipation. For months, Ryan had been preparing for this day, the culmination of his long and dangerous journey. He had seen his former boss fall from grace, watched his empire crumble, and dealt with the betrayal of someone he had once trusted. But now, it was time to bring the truth to light in the most public of arenas, the courtroom. The ex-boyfriend, who had been so sure of his victory just days ago, was now sitting across from Ryan, his expression one of quiet desperation. The trial was underway, and everything they had fought for, all the lies and secrets, would now be exposed in front of the world. Ryan knew this was his moment. He had already won in every other sense, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. He would make sure the ex-boyfriend paid for his manipulation and deceit. The prosecutor, a seasoned lawyer with a reputation for being relentless, stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we are here today to present undeniable evidence of the crimes committed by the defendant and his cohorts. The charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy are backed by overwhelming documentation, expert testimony, and the defendant's own actions. Ryan watched the ex-boyfriend's lawyer fidget nervously. They had no solid defense. The case was airtight, with damning evidence stacked against them. The forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the money laundering, all of it was in plain view for anyone willing to see. And now, with Ryan's testimony, the ex-boyfriend's true intentions would be laid bare for everyone to hear. The first few hours of the trial passed without much resistance from the defense. The evidence was irrefutable. But then, it came time for Ryan to take the stand. He rose from his seat, his heart steady as he walked toward the witness box. He had been through enough to know that this moment was his chance to bring the entire case home. The room was quiet, all eyes on him. The prosecutor introduced him, and Ryan gave his account of the events leading up to the exposure of his boss's empire. He spoke with clarity, recounting everything: his boss's manipulations, the fraudulent transactions, and the fake death scheme. He laid it all out in the most factual manner he could. But when he reached the part about the ex-boyfriend's betrayal, his voice grew sharper. After everything I uncovered, Ryan said, his gaze never leaving the defendant, I found out that I had been played. I thought I was working toward justice, but I was only a pawn in someone else's game. The man sitting in front of me betrayed me, lied to me, and used me to tear down everything his boss had worked for, all while plotting to take over his empire for himself. The ex-boyfriend shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face now red with anger. His lawyer immediately stood, objecting to the statements, but the judge waved it off. Ryan continued, his words cutting through the tension in the room. This man manipulated me into thinking I was fighting for justice. He knew exactly how far I would go, and he used that to his advantage. He was always in it for himself. The courtroom was silent. Even the jury seemed to be processing the gravity of Ryan's testimony. The ex-boyfriend's face twisted in frustration, but there was no escape now. The truth had come out, and there was no denying the extent of his deceit. Ryan sat down, his job on the stand done. He had exposed the lies and the manipulation, and now the jury had everything they needed to make their decision. But Ryan wasn't content with just the ex-boyfriend's conviction. He had one more card to play. The prosecutor had gathered all the pieces of the puzzle, but Ryan had kept one detail to himself, a small piece of evidence that would secure the ex-boyfriend's fate once and for all. It was a single document, an email exchange that showed the ex-boyfriend had been in contact with his boss's criminal partners after the fake death was staged. The ex-boyfriend had planned to take over the business, knowing full well that the empire he had been part of was a house of cards built on fraud. Ryan passed the document to the prosecutor, who immediately introduced it into evidence. The email, along with the other damning pieces of evidence, was all that the jury needed. The ex-boyfriend's scheme had been fully exposed. He was a criminal, just as guilty as the man he had helped bring down. The trial lasted only a few more days, but the outcome was inevitable. The ex-boyfriend was convicted on all charges: fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and manipulation. He was sentenced to a long prison term, his life now irrevocably destroyed by his own greed and betrayal. As Ryan left the courtroom, the weight of the past months finally began to lift. He had done it. He had taken down the man who had destroyed his life and manipulated him into becoming a pawn in a game of corporate greed. And now, justice had been served. But it wasn't over. For Ryan, the trial was just one chapter in a much larger story. He still had his life to rebuild. His path forward wasn't clear, but he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer the man he had been when this all began. He had fought for what was right, and in the process, he had found a new sense of purpose. The world would remember the trial, the scandal, and the fall of the corporate empire. But for Ryan, this was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming his life, his future, and his sense of justice. And he had done it. The days following the trial were a blur of press conferences, media interviews, and calls from old colleagues. The courtroom had delivered a decisive blow to the ex-boyfriend, and the world had watched as he was taken into custody. But while the focus was on the criminal convictions and the public disgrace of the once powerful figures, there was still one more casualty, one more person who had been instrumental in this twisted narrative: Melissa. Ryan had known that she was involved. She was his boss's most trusted confidant, and her role in his downfall had always seemed a little too clean, too calculated. Ryan had watched her through the trial, seeing her careful expressions and guarded body language. She had never once flinched or shown any remorse for the actions that had ultimately led to his boss's arrest. But as the media storm continued, Ryan knew it wouldn't be long before the truth about her involvement would catch up to her. The collapse of his boss's empire was now complete. The fake death, the criminal charges, and the ex-boyfriend's betrayal had ripped through every layer of his boss's carefully constructed world. But Melissa, ever the survivor, had positioned herself to walk away unscathed, or so she thought. Ryan had been doing some digging of his own in the quiet hours of the night when the media had moved on to the next scandal. He had discovered something significant, something that had slipped under the radar. Melissa had been in direct communication with the criminal network that his boss had been involved with. She had been the one handling the final details of the offshore accounts and the laundering operations. She was every bit as complicit as the others, and yet she had managed to escape much of the scrutiny. Ryan had a plan to change that. He reached out to his contacts within the media, the ones who had helped him expose the fraud in the first place. They were all too eager to get the next big story, especially one that involved a high-profile figure like Melissa, who had managed to stay under the radar for so long. The moment the media got wind of her involvement, everything would change. The very foundation of her career would crumble. The first report hit the news the following morning. The silent partner, how Melissa, the trusted ally, played a key role in the empire's fall. It was an exclusive expose that detailed her connections to the criminal enterprise and how she had helped orchestrate many of the illegal transactions that had brought down Ryan's boss. The evidence was irrefutable: emails, documents, and testimony from insiders who had worked with her, all confirming her active role in the corruption. The world was shocked. The same woman who had stood by his boss's side for years, who had been hailed as a business genius in the press, was now being exposed as a key player in the fraud. The story spread like wildfire, and soon, Melissa's name was being dragged through the mud. Her phone began to ring non-stop. Clients she had worked with for years started distancing themselves, cancelling contracts, and severing ties. Her trusted allies, those who had supported her throughout the years, began to turn on her, realizing that they had been complicit in the very crimes she had hidden behind a veil of charm and deceit. Melissa's carefully crafted persona, the one she had built by using her boss's influence, began to crack. Her social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and accusations. Her professional reputation shattered beyond repair. And just as the walls began to close in on her, the final blow came from the authorities. The criminal investigation, which had initially been focused on Ryan's boss, now turned its attention to her. The same legal team that had secured Ryan's victory was now working to secure Melissa's downfall. Ryan's lawyer presented new evidence, documents that showed how Melissa had manipulated the company's assets for personal gain. The fraud, the money laundering, the manipulation. It was all laid bare for the public and the authorities to see. Ryan watched it all unfold from his apartment. The satisfaction was bittersweet. He had never intended for it to be this way. He hadn't planned for Melissa to be swept up in the scandal. But in the end, she was just another casualty of the empire she had helped build. Her downfall was inevitable, just like his boss's. Ryan had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let her walk away unscathed. She was arrested in the dead of night, the same way his boss had been. The once untouchable corporate figure now reduced to nothing more than a criminal with no place to hide. Melissa's public arrest was the final piece in the puzzle, and it marked the end of the reign of the people who had controlled everything for far too long. As the media buzzed with coverage of her arrest, Ryan felt a strange sense of closure. The people who had once manipulated him, controlled him, and betrayed him were now all paying the price. But as he watched Melissa's face on the news, tearfully denying any involvement, blaming everyone but herself, Ryan couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of something else. Regret? No, that wasn't it. It was something deeper, something more unsettling. The more the media tore her apart, the more Ryan realized that she, like his boss, had never truly understood what it meant to be held accountable. They had lived their lives surrounded by power, wealth, and manipulation, believing that their actions had no real consequences, and in the end, that was what they had underestimated the most: accountability. Ryan looked at the screen one last time, then turned it off. His war was over. He had reclaimed everything, and yet, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. There was a world outside of revenge, and he had been given a second chance to write his own story. The courtroom drama, the betrayals, the media frenzy, they all seemed like distant memories now. In the days that followed the collapse of his boss's empire and Melissa's arrest, Ryan found himself standing at the precipice of something new. The years of revenge, the battles fought on the front lines of corporate deception, had finally come to an end. Now, it was time for him to step out from the shadows and rebuild. Ryan had been through a whirlwind, one that had tested his resolve, his intelligence, and his capacity for patience. He had taken everything his boss had, his fortune, his reputation, and his power, and used it to dismantle the empire. He had fought for justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been crushed under the weight of his boss's greed. In the end, Ryan had won. But victory, he realized, had come with a cost. Now, as he sat alone in his apartment, staring out at the city skyline, Ryan could feel the heavy weight of it all lift. There was no more drama, no more manipulation, no more constant battle for survival. The war was over, the enemies had fallen, and Ryan was left standing, the victor. But there was no sense of triumph in the silence that followed. Only peace. Ryan's phone buzzed on the table, breaking his quiet contemplation. It was a message from his lawyer, one of the final pieces of his battle with his former boss. The criminal charges against his ex-boss had been finalized, and all assets had been officially seized. The court had ordered compensation for all of Ryan's losses, both personal and financial. It was a significant settlement, but it felt insignificant compared to everything he had lost in the process. The money would help, of course. Ryan had already transferred the funds into an account he had set up, his own account, free from the corruption that had tainted his past. But the truth was, money didn't matter anymore. It never had. It was the fight that had driven him, the need to right the wrongs, to seek justice. But now that it was over, Ryan realized that he had been fighting for more than just money or revenge. He had been fighting for his own sense of purpose. The past few weeks had given Ryan a chance to reflect on what mattered most. His journey from corporate pawn to vengeful victor had been a roller coaster of pain, anger, and ambition, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery. In the midst of it all, Ryan had found something he had long lost, a sense of self-worth, a belief in his ability to take control of his destiny, and most importantly, a way to move forward. Ryan knew he couldn't live in the past forever. There was a future to think about now, a future where he would be in charge of his own destiny, free from the constraints of his old life. The fight was over, but the journey was just beginning. He had made enemies, yes, but he had also made friends along the way. Those who had helped him, the investigators, the lawyers, even the former colleagues who had chosen to stand by him, were the ones who had supported him through the darkest times. They were the people who had believed in him when he had nothing but his own will to rely on. As Ryan stood up and walked toward the window, he felt a sense of freedom that he hadn't felt in years. He had taken back what was his, and now he was free to live life on his own terms. The world outside the window was bustling, full of possibility. It was time for Ryan to step into that world, to take the lessons he had learned from this long battle and apply them to the future. No longer consumed by the need for revenge or retribution, Ryan was ready to embrace a new chapter. He would use the wealth he had gained to build something meaningful, something that didn't revolve around greed, manipulation, or vengeance. He would start over with a fresh perspective and perhaps even a new purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ryan looked at his reflection in the glass. For the first time in years, he didn't see a man consumed by anger or thirst for justice. He saw a man who had survived the storm, who had overcome the darkest forces that had tried to crush him, and who had emerged stronger on the other side. The silence of the aftermath was deafening, but in that silence, Ryan found clarity. He was ready for whatever came next. His journey had been long, but it had brought him to this moment, the moment when he could finally breathe, let go of the past, and start anew. Ryan smiled faintly as he turned away from the window. The world was his to conquer now, and he was no longer afraid.